Thank you. And very clearly, what President Obama is doing now stands in fairly stark contrast to what you're saying. You know, we have this $900 billion stimulus package, which he's proposing, which he says is absolutely vital, and without which there's going to be a disaster. People talk about deflation and you know, another Great Depression. What do you think of? It's very clear what you think of that response, but what do you think is the? Why do you think that's wrong, and what do you think is the right response to this?
Well, let me first of all maybe defend Obama and say Obama's no worse than Bush was. So this is not a Democrat versus Republican thing. And even if you look at the Republicans in Congress, their entire objection to the stimulus plan has been, we don't want 900 billion, we want 8 or 7 or 6. They're debating the numbers. When the whole notion of a stimulus bill is ridiculous. The idea that you can somehow get the economy going by, in a sense, taking money from some people and giving it to other people is ludicrous. Where does this money come from? Where does an $800 billion that they're going to approve, or maybe have approved already, come from? Well, they have to borrow it. In other words, they're taking money from the private sector, from people who have savings, and they're going to take that money away, and then they're going to decide how to distribute it. Government is not very good at making those kind of capital investment decisions. The private markets are much better. So what we're doing is we're sucking $800 billion, just the number is staggering, $800 billion out of the private economy, savings of people, and then we're handing it to a bunch of bureaucrats to distribute to their favorite causes, which is basically what's going to happen. To imagine that that has a positive impact on the economy is just absurd. The $800 billion in the private hands is not sitting in somebody's mattress, unused. It's sitting in banks that are lending that money. It's sitting in private equity funds. It would go into hedge funds. It would go into real investments in the economy. All that money would be invested in some way or another in the economy if the government didn't stimulate. It didn't use this $800 billion supposedly to stimulate. I would actually argue that, and by the way, this has never worked. So FDR tried this during the Great Depression, spent at that time in probably equivalent dollars today, he spent about $500 billion, and that didn't help the economy. The US economy was as bad in '39 when World War II started as it was in '33 when FDR took office. Unemployment was still double digits in '39. Nothing had really happened economically from all that money being thrown at it. And Japan, of course, tried this in the 1990s, and they went through what's called the lost decade. Nothing happened in their economy in spite of the government spending hundreds of billions of dollars on infrastructure projects and so-called stimuli. I would actually argue the exact opposite. If you want to stimulate the US economy, the best thing to do is cut government spending. Stop government borrowing. If the government borrows less money, that frees up more money for individuals and savers and institutions that are private to make investments in the real economy. It would reinforce the market mechanisms that are already at work trying to recover from the disaster of the last year or so. Get the government out of banking. Get the government out of housing policy. If you want to do anything, cut corporate income tax, cut the capital gains taxes, cut income taxes. But don't increase your debt load, debt that you can't pay off. The only way to pay off this debt is by printing money, which causes inflation. So the long-term consequence of this so-called stimulus plan is inflation. Instead of that, what you want is to get government out of the economy. You want to get government out of regulating the banks, in the way they do, out of regulating home ownership, and cut government expenditures dramatically. That will really, I mean, if Obama was cutting $800 billion from the US budget right now, the economy would boom, which is completely counterintuitive for most people. But the more government takes, the bigger chunk the government takes, the slower economic growth is going to be.
So there's no case, in your view, for government action to halt the fall in the supply of money and credit?
I think there is. So, I mean, you've got a problem. Once the Federal Reserve becomes the lender of last resort, once the Federal Reserve is responsible for the monetary system, it has to do something when money and credit collapse. And I think the Federal Reserve, by increasing, the money supply and by buying some of the debt and by lowering interest rate, it's probably doing what it should do, given the fact that that's its responsibility. Now, I would argue there should be a Federal Reserve to begin with. We should have a private banking gold standard and let private bankers deal with it, and then you don't get these widespread depressions. What you get is maybe localized issues, but you don't get systemic risk the way you do right now. But other than the Fed, the government should have no role in this crisis. It shouldn't be bailing out banks. The Treasury shouldn't be bailing out anybody. They should have let Bear Stearns collapse. They should have let AIG collapse. The Fed's job is to continue to provide liquidity into the market as these things are happening, and it's done that. Whether it's done it well or not, I think we will know in a few years when we look back at the data and see how well they performed. It's an impossible job, so the Federal Reserve almost never does a good job. It either undershoots or overshoots, because there is no market mechanism to tell them where the right price is. So I don't know exactly what they're doing wrong, but I can almost guarantee what they're doing is wrong. But other than the Federal Reserve, there should be no government intervention in the economy. Just leave it alone, let the markets sort this out, and ideally extract yourself out of the, as I mentioned, the government should be extracting itself out of the economy, extracting itself out of regulations, extracting itself out of spending all this money, private capital into the economy.